Уважаемые участники и гости форума, предлагаем вам занять места. Убедительная просьба перевести ваши мобильные телефоны в беззвучный режим. Через несколько минут мы начинаем. Спасибо. Уважаемые участники и гости форума, мы предлагаем вам занимать места. Убедительная просьба перевести ваши мобильные телефоны в беззвучный режим. Спасибо. Уважаемые участники и гости форума, мы приглашаем вас занимать места. Убедительная просьба перевести ваши мобильные телефоны в беззвучный режим. Спасибо. Уважаемые дамы и господа, мы начинаем работу пленарного заседания «Российская энергетика. Основа долгосрочного устойчивого развития России», проводимого в рамках ежегодного.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are about to start the plenary session, Russian Power Industry as a Basis for Long-Term Sustainable Development of Russia. For his welcoming words, we would like to invite on stage Vice Governor of St. Petersburg, Sergei Drigval. Esteemed participants, dear guests of the Russian International Energy Forum, on behalf of the Governor of St. Petersburg, Mr. Beglov, and on my behalf as well, I would like to welcome you all at the opening of an annual discussion with the participation of the energy experts. This sector plays an important role in the Russian economy. Its main goal is to contribute to the social and economic development of Russia. I think that the business program of the forum reflects completely all trends present in Russian energy sector. All participants, stakeholders, both Russian and international, will have an opportunity to discuss all questions and issues faced by the sector. I would like to highlight that next year, St. Petersburg will host the Global Energy Congress, a key event for the global energy sector. And I'm particularly glad that our city, thanks to these kinds of events, becomes a platform of discussion for global issues. I wish you fruitful discussions, breakthrough decisions and solutions. On behalf of St. Petersburg, since we are the host city, we will do our best in order for your stay be as present as possible. Thank you, Mr. Drigval. And now, we would like to invite our panelists, CEO of EXPOFORUM, Mikhail Khardikov, Director of the Renewable Energy Association, Wagon Consulting Partner, Alexei Zhikharev, CEO of Rusenergosbyt, Mikhail Andronov, First Vice CEO and Financial and Economy Director of Tatenergo, Ayrat Sabirzanov, CEO of ПАО «Quadro», Семен Сазонов. The moderator of the plenary session is the President of the Council of Energy Producer, Alexandra Panina. Madam Panina, over to you, please. Esteemed colleagues, hello. Very glad to see you all after this tough coronavirus year. We don't have many public events and you are now on one of the first of them. It is particularly good that the topic of our plenary session is related to the Russian power industry as a basis for long-term sustainable development of Russia. It's a good title, good highlight. Being professionals, we are very proud of our industry. Power sector of Russia is ranked 4th in terms of installed capacity, 3rd in terms of production globally after 2020. This is one of the biggest power networks. It has, however, several peculiarities. First, central heating distribution is a big thing here. Once again, when we are proud of our industry, we are usually proud of the achievements of the 20th century. Most power plants, most large-scale solutions have been implemented last century. In the 21st century, we are still moving forward and developing. Over the last 10 years in our industry, the industry constructed around 50 gigawatts of power plants. 50 gigawatt is an installed capacity of an average country. So it's a lot, and we commissioned them only during over the last 10 years. It's a large scale of nuclear power plant construction, hydro power plant construction. We are renovating ourselves. But we cannot say that we are on the age of continuous changes. And do you know, I have several topics I would like to highlight and discuss during our today plenary. The age of changes. We are either at the threshold of changes or we crossed it. Why? Sustainable energy, for instance. We started talking about it a couple of years ago at the same forum, and voices were quite calm. Now, these voices gain strength. In 2020, for instance, 260 gigawatts have been generated using sustainable energy, 50% more versus 2019. 260 gigawatts are actually bigger than the overall installed capacity here in Russia. Russia follows this trend, and we commissioned 200 megawatts of sustainable energy. Roughly 60% of all installed capacity commissioned in 2020. Remember Kyoto Agreement, carbon quotas trades, then the Paris Agreement saw its day, okay, Paris Agreement, climate agenda, and then around 200 countries adhered to the Paris Agreement, and it started a step-by-step process in terms of implementing Paris agreements and stimulating its respect by expanding, for instance, methods that we have in order to make a difference in the climate agenda. And remember, we thought that it was a remote future. Now we live in this future. Coal generation will be discussed as well. Let me remind you, when we started electric energy, roughly 100% of generation accounted to coal. Over 100 years, many things changed. New energy sources appeared, and now coal accounts for only 30 to 40% in the global energy balance. We are living through important changes in the industry. And these are the trends I'd like to cover today. We should stay within the mainstream. Otherwise, it would be different for us as energy specialists to maintain sustainable economic development of Russia. We need to be modern and we need to be future-oriented. And I would like to give the floor to Mr. Khardikov from EXPOFORUM. Mr. Khardikov, over the recent years, we've been discussing a lot with you the climate agenda and the risks associated to carbon regulation implementation in Russia. Experts say that in the worst-case scenario or pessimist scenario, carbon regulation, I will not dwell on that. The EU March 10 adopted the very first resolution aimed at creating this mechanism, and it fueled our fears. And Russian economy in the pessimist scenario over 10 years can lose as much as 50 billion euros if trans-border regulation is implemented. And 50 billion euros can go different ways to different countries to develop their energy system. It's a pain point for Russia, and we analyze whether it's okay or not okay. What makes Eurosip Energy different as a part of Rusal Group? And they have a free agreement between gas generation and their big consumer. So over to you, Mikhail. Do you think that the situation around cross-border regulation creates for Russia only risks, or it generates also some opportunities, and you have this long-term contract between the generator and the consumer? Do you feel safe?
Thank you, Alexander. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for coming to our panel discussion. Let me give you a broad answer to your question, to the question which you brought and about the opinion of the overall situation. If we go back to 10 or 15 years, you can remember that we had a lot of reforms, and I remember that even back then we discussed the concept of sustainable development. Unfortunately, only a few people believed that it was needed. People discussed it as something trendy. Let's do it because it's trendy, it's fashionable, let's find someone who doesn't have anything to do, they will read books and they will try to do something about it. As a matter of fact, over that period of time, the concept of sustainable development has been used widely around the world. It is a cornerstone of activities around the world. Those who do not declare sustainable development concept are not successful and not competitive in long-term perspective. A few words about the energy. Alexander said that a lot of new capacities were commissioned. Russia is in the trend of the use of renewable sources of energy. So all the people dealing with the generation of electric power have to answer the question, to whom do we generate it, and from where do we get one of the main sources, and namely money. Of course, the money comes from consumers. Sustainable development is not about the fact that we, the representatives of the energy market, worked with fossil fuel and suddenly decided to work with renewables. No, it's not like that. Maybe the situation is so in Russia that it's not a requirement in all the regions of Russia, but consumers require not only kilowatt hours, which we give them for their production a proof that this energy is green. That is one of the ideas of sustainable development. Speaking about sustainable development today, it's not only about environment. Sustainable development today is about competitive advantage for companies, economies, countries, and continents. It's politics and geopolitics and many more. In addition to that, we adhere to the goals of sustainable development. We gradually work with SDGs formed by the UN. There are 17 of them. We support all 17 of them, and we believe that the economies of the countries should not stay behind. You should follow them. I also mentioned money, and that was not in vain. I told you that we, as representatives of energy markets, should understand where the money comes from, and they come from consumers. Speaking about long-term financing in all advanced countries, it's necessary to have clear goals related to SDG and sustainable development. It's not possible to get loans, it's not possible to get long and short money. And for some types of generation, there are even limitations for loans, and you just cannot overcome those limitations. If you speak about advanced countries, if you want to get a project financing for coal generation, it's not possible, or the interest rate will be 10 or 15% per year in euro. So what kind of parameters should you have in that coal generation to make sure that you can pay back? Speaking about four main areas in the 17 SDGs by the UN, which we support leadership in the sphere of climate change. We support rational use of natural resources, development of human potential, cooperation and partnership. I would like to emphasize that we are the first and for now the only large company of Russia which has adhered to the declared goal of the UN to stop the global warming, which is related to the growth of temperature around the globe, and it should be no more than 1.5 degrees. We also have our goals on decrease of emissions by no less than 35% by 2030. And as far as 2050 is concerned, the emissions should have zero balance at N+ companies. EuroSIP Energy, Rusal as a producer of environmentally friendly aluminium with low hydrogen footprint. So Rusal was the first to register the new type of aluminium. It's called ELAO. It has a low carbon footprint. We got our certificates. The certification is approved. So we thought that it would be difficult to sell thousands of tons of aluminium to consumers if we could not provide guarantees to the consumers proving that this aluminium has the minimum carbon footprint possible. We have bilateral agreements between generation companies and consumers. So again, I emphasize that it's about the competitive advantage for consumers and for generators. We have the concept to develop domestic demand for aluminium, and we understand that even within Russia we should ensure maximum environmental friendliness of the products given to our consumers. So green energy, as I told you, is an important topic. It's even a requirement nowadays. Electric power generation should become green. That is the requirement which will come not from within, but from the consumers. our export and domestic producers will ask, like, how many emissions for the production of 1 kilowatt-hour of electric power do you have? So how much do you emit? How can you prove your targets? Like, if you declare that your electric power has 0 emissions, how can you prove it? One declaration is not enough. Speaking about energy business of Plus Group, we are the first company out of electric market which now issued certificates. The second producer in Russia is Polis. They are also registered in IREX system. We have sold quite a lot of certificates, I mean a lot in comparison to the previous time when we had 0. We not only prove the eco-friendliness of electric power produced at a hydro electric power station, but we see that there is a demand for that. I repeat once again, the demand for green energy will come from the consumers. We have to remember that, and we have to focus on it. Speaking about other areas of sustainable development which we support at N Plus Group, then there are specific projects, and namely these are the projects related to the recovery of forests. We planted more than 1 million trees in Krasnoyarsk and Irkutsk regions. We have projects to support forests, which is a part of sustainable development. I'm speaking about more than 500,000 hectares of forest. They are controlled and monitored. We fight against forest fires, and we organize compensation platforms. We deal with projects related to biodiversity. Of course, near Baikal Lake, but the concept of sustainable development says that if large companies do business in the region, it is important to support the biodiversity, understanding that in any case, doing your business, you interfere into the nature. So you have to make sure that you decrease the load on the environment. So we have projects to save the seals at Baikal and the animals in the Far East. Speaking about green projects in energy, I'd like to tell you that we have large projects called New Energy for our hydroelectric power plants. The volume of investment is 21 billion rubles. And we believe that no less than 2 billion kilowatt hours will be produced by hydro power plants thanks to the new equipment installed at our plants. You might think that 2 billion kilowatt hours out of about 70 kilowatt hours produced at hydropower plants in general, you might think that it's not much. But actually, the figure is important. Because you create new generation and you decrease the emissions of CO2 by 2 million tons. At all large hydropower plants in our company, we implement new energy project. Last year, we also have finished the project, which lasted for more than 7 years. The volume of investment was about 3 billion in the city of Angarsk, the old combined heat and power station station was closed, and we started to use the new modern source of generation. I repeat that the project lasted for 7 years. We had to transfer the generation to the new power plant, and we built about 30 kilometers of pipelines, which partially go through the oil refinery. And the new combined heat and power station was commissioned. The first heating season has finished, and it was successful. We work together with the government of the region in order to implement the new project. And as far as finances is concerned, we used our own funds. We are going to start the construction of a hydro power plant in Karelia, not far from here. It will be a new project. It's again a project which is in the stream of renewables. There are new sources of energy. We have to focus on them, and there is a big issue which we all have to discuss. We have to discuss the trends not only in Russia but also around the globe, and namely, why do the economies of advanced countries go up? Because there is a demand for energy to be green. Can you increase the share of renewables in your mix, including wind and solar, without thinking of the future? No, you shouldn't do it. And large players understand it, like French companies, for example. CEOs of companies met 2 years ago, and they asked the question how to balance the systems where the share of wind and solar energy in the mix takes a big part. Of course, wind and solar depend on climate conditions, and you have to have something to balance your mix. Two areas which are widely developed right now: industrial accumulators. Unfortunately, now it's still not possible. No one has demonstrated that you can use big accumulators to balance your system. They just don't exist. And accumulators have their own negative sides, the utilization of batteries. Because you have to think about the whole life cycle, and you have to show the eco-friendliness at all stages of life cycle. And then the second area, you can use hydro power plants to balance your system. We talked to our French partners, and they told us that they focus on the development of hydro accumulating stations, because hydro potential is used by 85%. You cannot build any other large hydro plants. And in Russia, our resources of hydro power plants are used only by about 20%. We still have potential to build hydroelectric power plants, and we believe that it is necessary to develop the so-called pumped storage hydro station. The demand will come to them. One of the projects we are going to declare soon, construction of the large mixed pump storage plant in the eastern part of Russia. It's a great source of energy to increase the capacity of Baikal-Amur main line, and companies which work for a long-term perspective and which will have to decrease their carbon footprint in the future. Unfortunately, we don't have any large projects of the construction of hydroelectric power stations in Russia, but in China, they are ready to build large hydroelectric power stations. In 2023, they are going to commission the second largest hydroelectric power station in the world. They also do the same in Africa. They have large projects for the construction of hydroelectric stations. And we here in Russia have to think how to support this area in order to follow sustainable development goals. Well, that was all I wanted to tell you. Thank you. Thank you. Rusal is a larger exporter. Green aluminium is a topic which you have been dealing with for many years. We have heard it from you that you have a program of development related to it. And what do you think about other consumers and societies? When will they understand the necessity to implement environmental agenda? If you talk to people in the hall, do you care about environmental issues or environmental agenda? You can often get an answer that this is a policy of Western countries. It's more an economic policy and not an environmental policy. Western countries use this policy to get rid of high carbon dependency.
When the society will say that we will not feel the impact from the trans-border regulations, when the minds will change, I see the possibility of this change, and I would like to highlight that not only Rusal, as the big aluminium exporting company, thinks that we need to take a low-carbon approach on iron industry or gold industry that I mentioned before. Everyone thinks about it. If even partially, if you sell something abroad, and on our council we've been discussing that with your presence, actually, that colleagues that represent Lukoil generators say that they are taking the same approach, and they are from oil and gas. Not only Rusal thinks about it, many other companies think as well. Some made better progress. Some, a couple of years ago, still smiled or grinched, and this skepsis is not present anymore. Jokes aside now, from the trans-border carbon regulations, I share your position that this argument can be used as a geopolitical tool because it is attractive. Nevertheless, we should not say that it should be abandoned. Why? Because President Putin, for instance, highlighted on many occasions the importance of taking care of the environment and of the actions that should be taken in this context. Next, talking about the ministry and the government, they actively work on Russian green certificate concept and own approaches to what can be considered as green energy. Being a private company, we do have several questions. For instance, when the Ministry for Economic Development says that projects that can be eligible to green financing should have less than 25 megawatts in capacity, which means that more important generation capacities cannot be green. No, that's not true. From the scientific standpoint, it can be explained. And the federal law number 35 has no limitations capacity-wise for renewables. We need to change this focus a little bit, if I may. But I tend to agree with you that when we talk now about every individual, the society doesn't show this degree of demand that is present in developed countries. But they had their own path. Before COVID-19, we were able to go to Europe in order to learn from them. And waste collection, environmental concerns, they have tools accessible to simple citizens for them to be able to contribute to the environment agenda. We will be there because we see more and more containers to separately collect waste, for instance. And back in 1998, roughly, I lived in Europe. And even back then, I saw trash bins in houses under the dishwashers to collect wastes separately, not on the streets, not municipal wastes, but personal wastes in their houses and apartments. Because garbage collection starts from yourself. And then people can keep track of what is going on with their wastes. And everyone saw waste incineration plant in Vienna. And this plant is located within the city, let's face the truth. But we will be there, and our new generations will generate this demand. In other countries, this demand is already here, and people pay greater attention to the, for instance, to the packaging. In many countries, it is prohibited to use plastic bags free of charge. You cannot ask to place anything in the plastic bags. You should buy a plastic bag. And many initiatives are related to sustainable development and ESG agenda are implemented on a routine basis. We should get over it. And we need to understand that it is a path to take. And we, as energy leaders, should be prepared right now. We should not only stay silent and hope for something to happen, and we should not stay still and wait until there's demand to appear in 5 years. The life cycle in energy sector is not 1 year. When we talk about hydro plants or any other plants, is at least 5 years. I'm not saying that we are lagging behind. No, far from that. We still have this opportunity to forge a competitive economy, and we are doing so. Thank you, Mr. Khardikov. We have a live stream, and we have several participants who will connect online to our panelists. And I would like to give the floor to Stepan Solzhenitsyn, CEO of Siberia Generation Company and CEO of SWEC LLC. SWEC is a coal-developing company, and Siberia Generating Company owns many coal plants. So my question goes to you. Coal business and coal-powered power station. What's the future? The EU, for instance, has strategies And many countries within the EU will abandon coal generation by 2030. Of course, we still have developing markets and Asian countries on which coal is still in high demand. But according to you, the destiny of coal, we have quite a good example of coal processing in Germany. They decommissioned a coal plant to change it into hydrogen cluster. So probably the future of coal business is that the coal will become a source of hydrogen. And now we still have methods to add hydrogen to coal to become clean and modern. This environmental agenda, will it bring to the situation that a deeper processing of coal will take place, petrocoals, or we will still have coal energy with the coal power plants, but they will be equipped with better processing and cleaning capacities in order to clean the coal. Thank you very much for your question. Of course, we see that the answers will be yes, yes, and yes. Over several decades, coal will still be directly burned. For 3 billion people that are not rejecting it. 1 golden billion is rejecting coal right now, and this discontinuation will be definitive. Taking the first approach to this issue, we need to ask ourselves, we as Russia, what do we want? What does our society think and why? First and foremost, I would like to echo the idea that environmental issues are here to stay. It's a reality. People care about the air they breathe, the water they have, the water they consume. People care about what is going on with solid wastes that have been mentioned by the previous panelist. And no other modernization is possible within our coal industry, but the one that is environmentally aimed. We will decommission old equipment that is easier to repair than to make it green. China took this path. Coal is still the foundation of its economy. With all the diversification of energy sources that is happening right now in China, regardless of that, coal accounts for 2/3 of energy generation in the country. And they don't even think about discontinuing coal 100%. They will decommission old equipment in order to install new technical solutions. What is going to happen in Russia? For sure, the coal chemistry, the coal fuel chemistry will be high on the agenda. This process is not quick. We already produce fuel bricks or fuel briquettes that is directly competition for single-family homes use. If it will not be us, other company will suggest a solution that is not issued from the 19th century, but will respect all the principles of the 21st century, allowing them not to buy coal, not to burn coal in their houses, but to become green in terms of their energy consumption. We will see it both in individual houses and functions, and we will see it in the industry as well. Every year, the situation will gradually change. And fuel sector will still contribute to the good of the country. But don't forget about money, okay? Waste example that has been given is something that touches the hearts of people because they care about the environment. They are ready to collect waste separately. But do we have a market for all waste collected separately, for all types of waste collected separately? Because sometimes waste collected separately is remixed again, and the environmental impact is zero. But there's a large impact from the psychological standpoint for people. But we are not psychologists. We should not forget economic reasoning. The only message that we can pass to the coil is become more environmental friendly. And let's say from the geography standpoint, half of the territory and 20% of population lives in the situation where coal is the most economically attractive source of energy. So Russia wants to preserve it. And our Western compatriots, they mixed two notions, climate and environment. If we follow them, we will mix these two notions as well. Climate doesn't impact the quality of life in Russia. It is even more important that the price that has to be paid in order to implement no-carbon technologies and renewables doesn't guarantee that the global warming will be stopped. No one asks the question from the other side. Do we really understand the climate cycle well in order to be able to stop the global warming? The answer is no. We don't have enough knowledge. Sooner or later, we will decide that even acknowledging that this topic should be on the agenda. Okay, we will put it on our agenda as well. But within this topic, we can still protect and fight for our own interests as a country, or we can be on the bit of other countries, whether they are friendly or unfriendly to Russia. I would like to ask a little question. Everyone read that the Ministry of Economic Development published the project of long-term Russian development with low GHG emission by 2050. There are different development scenarios, and one of the scenarios has the following. In the second part of the 21st century, Russia can take the path of no-carbon development, zero-carbon development. My humble opinion, well, the first part of the 21st century is not far enough, as I perceive it. Do you believe in this scenario? Because it's very difficult to imagine that in the second part of the 21st century, that Russian Federation, as one of the biggest hydrocarbon exporter, will abandon this important source of money. Is this a realistic scenario, and other scenarios will take place? I'll take the following standpoint. we really want Russia to become, in the second half of the 21st century, high-tech exporter, for it to be the country with growing economy. And it conditions the technologies that will be used in our energy balance. If over the recent future, the storage of energy, the use of little generators, less than 25 megawatts, and if we will be able either to satisfy peak demands or whether we'll be able to stock energy. The sources of energy that will be economically viable should be used for Russia. Talking about a 10-year cycle for power sector, it's a blink of an eye. But if we talk about 50-year cycle, and we are going to 2070, it's a new generation of new capacities. So it may be possible that in 2070, all technologies will be used, and maybe we will not use electricity as the main source of energy. And it is one of the production area. We should not underestimate a human genius. And in the long-term perspective, I welcome that. I don't want to say that we depend upon hydrogen, let's do it tomorrow. No, let's do something that is economically viable. And I don't like to say that I don't want to see that we do economically fashionable technologies.
I'd like to support your idea about the cost of technologies, which are related to the transfer to the clean energy. It's not a secret that they are expensive. I'd like to make a joke that out of the countries which signed the Paris Agreement, Suriname and Bhutan, and now have already fulfilled the conditions of it. The area of forest is big and the economy doesn't develop. Advanced countries like the USA, for example, understand that clean eco-friendly technologies cost a lot. They are related to the growth of GDP. So advanced countries agree to it, but how can you find balance between affordable, cheap electric power, which is not eco-friendly, or green energy or hydrogen energy, which is not affordable? The price you get with coal generation, for example, is completely different than the price you get with renewables. One question about electrification. What do you think about this trend? Do you remember that the society was waiting for electric cars? Now we have them. It's a trend which is widely promoted according to the forecast of analytics. About 30% of cars will account for electric cars. Now there's a new trend for hydrogen transport. So as far as the trend for electrification is concerned, what do you think about it in the world and in Russia? As far as the world is concerned, it's a leading trend over the last years. And 2020s are the years of electrification in the world. The only type of energy consumption which is going to increase. The world is growing based on energy, which is different from the growth of the US and Western countries in 1920s. Today, the growth is different. many types of energy sources will not grow, but the production of electric power will grow. We advocate for that because it helps us resolve environmental problems, which is relevant for Russia. Electric vehicles are relevant. If you want to make a structure of the market, then electric heating will be relevant too. Our task is to heat, to give light, to develop business and to bring forward the population. Gas can do it, hydrogen can do it in the future, coal can do it too. But the question is, what is more efficient from the point of view of environment and economy? But in the places where there is no gas and hydrogen is to be developed in the future, electrification is the fastest and, of course, the best answer from the point of view of economic indicators. If we had this idea back in 1920s, then we should use the same motto in 2022. Right. Thank you, Stepan. Do we have questions? I would like to add one thing. I agree with Stepan. The question about waste separate collection. The majority of people don't understand where it's going to. Well, people guess that the separated waste is brought in the same bin. There are beautiful containers of different colors which stand near houses and shops, but people believe that it all comes to one landfill. If we have a system, if we tell people what we do about separated waste, the more people will do it. And it's a political question, Stepan. Question about our partners and colleagues. So how can you assess the declaration of SDGs, cutting emissions on the one hand, and limitation to purchase high-tech equipment? These are two processes. Can they overlap or influence each other? What do you think about it? First, yes, they can. I would say so. If you speak about industrial policy, if you say that you want to build an industry which can be a competitor at the international level, then it's great if you advocate for that. We can do something, we can develop our domestic demand, and we will not depend on the world, because we will have unique technologies on our own, but then the scale of the process should be different. For Russian producers to be able to compete with world producers, the scale and financing should be different. The financing should be from the budget and from other sources of funding. Speaking about the dependency on import, I can tell you the following. What can we see today with the trans-border tax, for example? My colleague was right to say, as soon as Europeans start to say that nuclear power plants of more than 25 gigawatts are not zero, have not zero carbon footprint, it's just a trade policy. They put it in the package of climate limitations, but actually it's politics. So we can come up with different limitations. I don't want to make any forecast, but we as representatives of business should be ready for all consequences, including all difficult and complicated consequences and limitations. I believe that this is possible, and the return to a different scenario, like free trade, for example, are possible. But it doesn't look possible today, but the scenario of limitations and measures against Russia looks quite possible, I would say. Thank you, Stepan, and thank you for vocalizing the point of view. As a moderator of the plenary session, I didn't want to vocalize this position, but often when I talk to people and we discuss climate agenda, everyone says it's not about climate, it's about trade, it's about economy. But the president of Russia drew the attention to the importance of climate issues. Russia joined the climate agenda. There is a project of the strategy of low carbon development of Russia till 2030. Russia can win or lose if we follow the climate strategy. Because if we do not follow the climate agenda, we will have problems with floods, with earthquakes, but on the other hand, we will have increase of agriculture. Even in that strategy, climate changes are observed from different points of view because they can have different consequences for the economy of Russia, both positive and negative. Let's continue to speak about renewables and how they are related with the traditional sources of energy. I invite Alexei Zhikharev, who is Director of Association of Renewable Energy. Association of Renewable Energy is not a simple organization in Russia. They are trying to find their place under the sun. They apply a lot of efforts to do it. I'm representative of traditional generation, but renewable energy is more expensive than traditional generation. Even in comparison to traditional gas stations, the cost is high, so it's difficult for them to find a place under the sun in the structure of Russian energy. If we have a look at our structure, we can say that our structure is correct. In the structure of energy generation, we have quite a big share of hydro plants, gas generation, nuclear plants, coal applies for a small share in the mix. But if you have a look at the structure in a conserved way, it looks good and even much better than the generation system in other countries. But what changes can we see in the structure of energy generation of other countries? The share of renewables, wind and solar, first of all. The share of renewables in 2019 becomes significant. In the US, for example, 2019, the generation of renewables is 12%, China 15%, France 11%, Sweden 21%, Finland about 30%, and Germany 37% account for renewables in the energy mix. And if we take the generation of Russia, the share of renewables in 2019 was much lower, something like 0.001%. And according to the program, we want to make sure that the share of renewables in Russia is 2% by 2030, even with the implementation of all the state programs. Alexei, I have a question to you. The competition between traditional generation and renewables. It happens so because the funds are limited, and you can use the funds either for traditional generation or other segments or renewables. Is there a way to find a compromise between traditional energy and renewables? Thank you, Alexandra. Thank you for your question. I hope that by 2035, the share of renewables will be 3.5 or 4%. If the program launches, we should be able to get that indicators. Well, if we have a look at renewables and its competitiveness with traditional sources of energy, or how you can bring them together, if you have a look at Russia, we can say that now in Russia there is no problem related to the competition between renewables and traditionals. It just doesn't exist. Now the renewables account for 0.5% in terms of energy consumption. You gave us a list of other countries where the share of renewables is much bigger. But we need to have, when we speak about the strategy of low carbon development, we need to see how healthy the energy mix is, and we need to think about the forecast. When investors take decisions about investing here or there, they check not only the current state, but they make the forecast for the future. And of course, in the next 15 or 20 years, our energy system will lag behind the world trends. I've been working in energy for 15 years, and I've been dealing with renewables for 10 years. When I started to deal with it, I worked in the World Bank, and we had jokes about it. There was a famous and serious expert who worked in renewables for 30 years in Aberdeen. If you know, there is a world fair and exhibition of oil and gas companies. So he came there and said, deal with renewables. For those serious people, renewables were just a boat in the ocean, and there is a small person standing on the boat and shouting to the captain of a large ship that you need to turn around. And that was a joke, and that was how investors saw renewables 10 years ago. But now it's different. We can dispute what perspectives different generation types have, but 2020, despite all the crises, lockdowns, and restriction measures, broke all the records in terms of investment activity. There were a lot of climate-related investments, foundations, and funds in climate agenda increased by 30%. So we can draw conclusions about investment. You may support this or that technology and find chances that it can survive, but if in 5 years you don't find investors who invest money into the projects, or if the projects are too expensive, then we have to think about it now. The speed of growth surprises us. Renewables have been developing for 20 years, but in 2020, the growth of investment was by 9%. I would have a look at Russian energy from the point of long-term perspective. We have the program of low carbon strategy. If we implement it, we need to offer measures to achieve targets. If you have a look at the targets, you will see that it's necessary to decrease the number of fuel by 20% by 2035. But I don't see that there are any programs implemented in Russia which will allow us to get this target by 2035. There are a lot of discussions about it. My colleagues speak about it. It's necessary to modernize heat generation. We need to focus on the construction of gas turbines. So now we have two projects related to the construction of gas turbines. It's also necessary to decrease the emission of carbon. It should be by 8 million tons, and renewables will help you decrease your emissions by 15 million tons. You might think that it's not much, but the efficiency of investments and priorities of climate agenda should be there when you compare the projects and the investments in long-term perspective. That is a view of the investor and future of two areas. Speaking about the cost of generation, we need to return to the question why renewables do not develop so quickly in Russia. Yes, now the new projects of renewables generation are more expensive than the average price of traditional energy. That is truly so, but there in the traditional sources, the price is already amortized. If you have a look at the rates of nuclear generation, they are higher. And I guess that at our market, the parity rate will appear in 5 years. In Europe and other countries of the world, they had the same trends. Large amount of investment was used to get the price parity as soon as possible.
When we hear the questions or speeches that in Russia prices for renewables and equipment are higher, and last year we commissioned 1 gigawatts with some projects that lagged from 2019. And for the second program, for instance, our regulator suggests to install 150 megawatts of solar energy and 300 megawatts for wind. And it's much smaller than the EU. And the government and governmental officials say, give us prices in China, but we are not able to do so. The market cannot overcome this impediment. It's a vicious circle. On one hand, the volume will be insured when the price will decrease, and the price will decrease only when the volumes will become higher. This is the prerequisite for the normal development. We are not talking about a radical change of situation. Either ways, for the next 10 to 15 years, we don't forecast the renewables increase higher than 5%. And when we talk about increasing renewables share for more than 25%, so we need to start changing the system now, reserve capacities right now. And it's not a secret that the amount of reserves that we have right now. And renewables are connected to all heat power plants. And coming back to the peculiarities of generation, even here, renewables are often criticized that solar has 16%, wind 30%, little renewables a bit higher. and on average it's 25% effectiveness. And from the effectiveness standpoint, we have no issues, no problems to flag. No questions should be asked. In fact, when we take a look at the prices of separate power plants, the final energy price can be as high as 100 rubles, or even 10 times higher than the generators that are working according to the free schedule. And I tend to disagree with Mikhail when he was talking about big storage capacities that will allow us to become more efficient in renewables. And it can become a reality if only we take about a large increase of generation. Hydro-accumulated power plants, lithium-ion storage capacities, but hydrogen was not mentioned. Now, not only in Russia, it's a global trend. Hydrogen is becoming global. There's a project and the concept of hydrogen energy development that will potentially allow, in case we meet certain objectives, to have technologies that will allow us to use hydrogen technologies for energy storage and accumulation. That will be generated by renewables, low carbon. When I hear phrases like the climate doesn't impact the quality of life in Russia, and Mr. Solzhenitsyn said that, it sounds bizarre, because talking about economy, it does have an impact. Traditional inertial economy becomes the boat. Remember this little joke about people on the boat shouting on the gas carrier? Inertial economy will become little boats, and people on green tanker will shout on them, saying that you are taking the wrong way. And the green economy will become more and more powerful. Climate agenda creates a huge technology, equipment, and component markets globally. And we cannot deny that, and we should not deny that, because it's clear that all technologies are outdated, and Russia can receive huge benefits from becoming a part of climate agenda. And I'm not talking about energy sector. I'm talking about the economy per se, in order for Russia to be able to find its niche on the global market. So we cannot say that climate agenda doesn't impact the economy, because it does. We can deny that. We can try to come up with tools that will allow to mitigate consequences. But everyone understands that we cannot abandon it. We need to be able to turn it into benefits and not into losses. And it's feasible. Talking about quality of life, it's a separate topic to discuss. It's a common knowledge that national projects such as pure air and pure water depend upon the technologies that are used in energy and power sector. We mentioned waste several times already. Any regulatory system is a trade policy, but any policy is a consequence of a long-term strategy. Therefore, here in Russia, we need to understand what do we want long-term from waste policy? Do we want to train our people to do waste sorting in order then to mix all waste all together and bring it to a landfill? Or to implement measures that will allow us to become better using regulatory leverage from the government as well? If the government doesn't send you signals with sanctions, if you don't sort what's going to happen to you, the economy will completely ignore any waste sorting. Therefore, I see great potential in renewables and green investment and green economy. And I think that in energy sector, in power sector, companies should perceive their energy balance becoming greener as an investment in their attractiveness in the companies. Companies that implemented sustainable development programs benefit from cheaper money. Before that, it was fashion. Now, we talk about benefits that are measurable in dollars. Same applies to investment attractiveness and the possibility to attract investment. The market always has companies that want to sell some shares to an investor. And a large amount of investors actually invests in green projects. I have another question to you, Mr. Zhikharev. There are investors that put great emphasis on green agenda because they work with foreign companies or because this is their mindset. Why renewables don't work for these investors? Rusal, for instance, green, let's say it constructed a green system. Why consumers are cautious about renewables? Because we are operating on the wholesale markets, and payments are done by all of them, by all market participants, including those who don't share green agenda. If we're talking about specific investors that are very keen in green projects, for investors that are ready to pay more for green project because maybe it will be able to attract cheaper money abroad, or because of its social agenda. Do you see any trend that renewables in whole market are not there to stay and they will be used by specific investors? It's a complicated question and a simple question at the same time. Why complicated? Because market regulations here in Russia is engineered in a way that we cannot imagine a large project implementation. And I'm talking about wind fields, for instance, 100 megawatt power plant dedicated to a sole consumer. That's a complicated thing. But what I can say that I see the trend that shows that industrial consumers at least analyze the possibility to construct a farm with renewables in order to cover their own, to meet their own goals and satisfy their own requirements. Sibur, Gazprom, and PVs are high on the agenda because PVs are easy to integrate in the industrial landscape. Wind farms are larger venues that should be integrated into a larger network. We work upon the possibility to implement in our market and in our regulatory system in order to implement this project on the basis of the direct agreement in order not to break the payments to all market participants. This initiative is here. A future-oriented demand is present as well. Consumers understands now that the price from this kind of generation facilities are stable, that technically it is feasible as well. So they can not only have economic benefits, but also become greener. Within the next 10 years, we will for sure have this kind of project in a large number. Several off-grid industrial facilities examine the possibility to create their own generation facilities off-grid as well. And I'm talking about exploration companies and development companies. March 5, the decree has been signed, opening new window of opportunities for individuals for microgeneration equipment. In a bigger picture, talking about renewables support, we follow the same path that has been followed by other countries. No country had an approach of a single user perspective. All projects were network. I'd like to ask you a question. I'm here. Sorry. We were co-authors of thermal energy strategy. Correct me if I'm wrong. You said that by 2035, you said that more than 1 trillion will be invested in renewables. In Russia or globally? No. You said that. Maybe I misquoted you. No. In Russia, by 2035, in renewables, there will be the investments that can go as high as 550 billion rubles. Could you please pick 3 basic items that form the requirements for renewables development in Russia in order to gain the trust of the investors and in order to pay back the investors as well? Investors believe already, not only our investors, but global investors, international investors. Last week, IKEA bought a solar portfolio from Solar Systems company. So what mechanism are we talking about? We are talking about power delivery contract. Power delivery contract is an important tool that guarantee return of investment within 10 to 15 years. This is what investors trust in. For new investors, the possibility to implement in Russia the carbon regulation or carbon quotes is a signal that allow to the investor to forecast benefits for additional investors, and green certificate market that will appear next year or in 2 years. Carbon regulation that will be adopted and the law should be entered into force. All of this will stimulate investments, trigger investments green agenda. And I'm coming back to Alexandra's question about individual projects. The main stimulus here is the market price, because in some regions for end user the price can be higher than 7.5 to 10 rubles per kilowatt per hour. It's a direct foundation to invest in your own sources of energy generation. That's a separate market that is closer to energy service agreements than to your question. I cannot stay silent. This topic is of a paramount importance. Why consumer should pay for renewables power delivery contract? Why consumers should pay for car modernization of a heat power station? Whether a consumer can change or not, can pay or not? No, it's a weird position. And I'm having both hats at the same time, because we do have combined heat and power plants. And we cannot say that power delivery contract for renewables is an add-on. It's not an add-on. If we ask a consumer what he or she is keen to pay for, we can receive an answer that we can. And maybe we should pay for something. It's better to pay for something that will return benefits for us in terms of carbon footprint or foreign money. But it's not evident right now. I would like to say that go to the direct contracts, pass your contracts, only those who are interested in green. Otherwise, you take money from the wholesale market. We do have other entities that take a lot of money from the wholesale market. So either we use the same standards for everyone, or it's a non-standard situation. And I would like also to comment on what Alexei said. He referred to my presentation. I didn't tell about hydrogen because I was the first to introduce. Do you have hope in hydrogen? Not a simple hope. We plan to develop hydrogen production using electrolysis on the plants related next to hydropower station. It's a part of energy that is a part of N+. Second part is all about synergy with Rusal, and we do some R&D activities in order to produce containers in order to transport hydrogen using aluminium. Talking about rebalancing of energy system that you mentioned, you are contradicting yourself. We need to think. Renewables are here to stay. My message is a bit different. Energy balancing is faced by developed countries that have 20 to 30% of renewables. And they figure out that growing renewables doesn't mean that you need to have the same reserve of heat, for instance. Same applies to when we talk about electrical vehicles, and we will generate additional electrical energy for electrical vehicles on a separate electrical power plants. And we need to think, we need to talk in order to meet an overall concept. We are sure we need to do that. We need to have little hydro plants, bigger hydrogen accumulation and energy sources. This is the possibility to achieve the goals.
I'd like to participate in the discussion. Mikhail has almost answered my question. I agree with you that all technologies should live in one competition. If you ask me, I'm advocating for free contracts at wholesale market. Our wholesale market is limited, where all the consumers get one price, and that is 2.5 rubles. That is one rate. I didn't talk about power delivery contract modernization because that price is lower than that price. It's about 2 rubles, and one rate at the market is 2.5. So the average price is what the consumers choose, but the price of renewables there, the price is 26, when the average price is about 2 rubles. And according to my calculations, the solar energy will be about 16 rubles. But when you speak about traditional sources, you give us average weighted prices. But here you give us peak prices. Peak solar 26, cheap solar 16. The cheap wind generation is about 6 rubles. Then it is comparable with coal. That is my answer to Mikhail's position. I wanted to ask you a question. The modernization now is less than one rate, and new technologies are higher than that. So perhaps we need to bring them from the wholesale market. And my idea is that the difficulty of our energy system, all the problems with power delivery contracts are related to the fact that we cannot make free contracts. If we could have free contracts, investors would choose the type they want. Modernization, then modernization. Green energy, then green energy. Heat and power plant, then yes. And they could choose their portfolio, and we can now only buy whatever is offered at the market. Speaking about consumers, I'd like to ask a question to Sergei Andronov, the president of Rusenergospyt. The first part of my question is related to the green topic and green certificates. That is the topic which is widely discussed now. I know that you personally and the community of consumers have proposals related to green certificate Act. So one question from a representative of Interau. We have companies that sell energy, for example, in the Baltic countries. Our experience is so that our affiliated bodies sell energy at retail, and 72% of the energy are accompanied with green certificates. We actively work with green certificates. Why? Because in Lithuania, for example, the legislation is developed so that if you give a green certificate, if you buy a green certificate with energy, you don't have to pay excise duties. There are companies which have tax benefits, but if you buy a green certificate, you get an economic stimulus. A similar situation is observed in Poland. They also have green certificates. They also have blue certificates. They are mandatory. You have to buy them, because if you don't buy them, you have to pay penalty. And there are other countries in the Baltic region, where Estonia, for example, or Latvia, where there are no economic stimulus. There are no taxation benefits. There is no opportunity not to pay the excise duties, and there the share of green certificates in our portfolio is much less. I have a question to you, Sergei. So when consumers choose green certificates, they use different logics, from ideology to economic indicators to get tax benefits, to pay less, to get less interest rate, and so on. What about the modern model of green certificates? What characters should it have to make sure that consumers are interested in green certificates? What can you offer to the model of green certificates? Thank you. Thank you, dear colleagues. I'm happy to see you all here. Seems like the pandemic is coming to an end. I'm especially happy to see Mr. Kopsov and Mr. Kotelov. They are teachers in the sphere of energy. I'm happy that you are safe and sound and with us. Thank you for being with us. I have a presentation, so could you please show my presentation on the screens? Right. We always try to act pragmatically. What certificates are about? And let's have a pragmatic and practical view on the certificates. What is a green certificate? We said today that the reasons of global warming are not known to humanity yet. You can have a different position, but one of the largest producers in the US do not sign the agreement, and I can agree with them. We know the history of humankind, we know the Ice Age, but we don't know why it happened and why it finished. But the eco-friendly people try to use a pragmatic approach. Let's take taxes, import tax for the products with big carbon footprint. Or there's another approach, let's take money. This is what they prepare, and we know that starting with 2023, companies exporting energy, which pay taxes where a lot of people work, will have to buy them. So according to our view, there is an attempt to take money from the Russian producers to finance renewable energy in Europe using the money of Russia. That is an approach they use, and I want to have the same pragmatic approach too. And that was the start of certificates around the world. Blue, green, renewable certificates. I'm not going to list all of them. If you have a look at this map, you can see that Russia and other countries don't use them actively, but other countries use them where they have a lot of renewable energy, like Iceland or Norway, or where they have few natural resources. They haven't used trillions of their money to make infrastructure and to find deposits. They force us to buy their technologies and to use their technologies instead of using our own natural resources. This is what happens in the US. This is what happens in European Union, Great Britain, all the countries which have no natural resources say you should pay for an ability to have natural resources. But here you can see that as far as the structure of consumption is concerned, we are not D students. We have quite a lot of gas generation, which is not so bad. We have hydro, we have nuclear, we are somewhere in the middle. So 15% account for coal, 44% account for gas. Even now, the situation is not bad. We are somewhere in the middle. We are not a D student. We are not the worst. And what do we want? We want to have a pragmatic view. When we speak about certificates, we want to make sure that they are comparable with Europe. If we have something local, something Russian, a piece of paper which is not perceived in the European Union, then it's only an image. Maybe companies like Coca-Cola will buy it, but it will not have any economic reason. Alexandra spoke about Baltic countries where they have strict eco-friendly approach, people will have to be pragmatic, because otherwise people will not buy it. We know that Lenenergo discusses the introduction of certificates, but the main condition is that they should be homogeneous with the European countries. If it works for export, then it's okay. Our producers can pay a small amount of money than paying taxes in European Union. I guess that is an approach we are ready to use. And we need to earn money. In Russia, about 200 billion kilowatt hours are used, are generated in the sphere of low carbon energy, excluding nuclear generation. Exporters consume less than 300 kilowatt hours, so we have 400 kilowatt hours for low carbon. We have also an ability to sell it to Europe. That could be a good option, and I believe that that is the way we should go. Harmonious certificates with the European countries and an ability to earn some money. So, my proposal. We talked about various ideas. All possible positions were vocalized, and it helps me save time. Like, do you have to develop renewables or not? Our approach is so that we build renewables anyway. We already pay for it. Alexei gave some figures. I was surprised. Irat tried to make a note, 550 billion rubles. It's such a huge amount of money, and this is what we pay. So there is a question: if green certificates in the world are an attempt to take money from importers, which bring products from other countries and support renewables, then in our country we already have the system. You might like it, you might not, but the decrees of the government are there and the legislation is there. We already pay. Our pragmatic approach is, so if I pay this money, I need to get the certificates. And when I say I mean the consumers, the buyers on the wholesale market who paid and will pay this money according to the program of power delivery contracts. I have no doubts that we will take this money from our pockets and give them to the energy guys. When you get the certificates, you can use them the way you want. First, you can show your products to the consumers, like IKEA or cars. You can show that you paid according to the power delivery contract, and I have a green certificate. And second, you can sell this certificate to Rusal if Rusal is exporting the products, and if you want to prove the products and their eco-friendliness. Because for now, as consumers, we get only big invoices. We know that there is a program, we know that there is a world trend. They build something related to renewables, but if you want the consumers interested in it, then please make an image that we are also participants. Now we see that we buy energy for 6 rubles, for 16 rubles. That is not cheap at all. And the generators of renewables should take the argument and say, you not only pay 26 rubles, you get a green certificate. You can show the certificate to your partners. Give us a chance to psychologically calm down and to think that it all is reasonable and makes sense. So together with bilateral agreements, there should be certificates, and they should be in harmony with the European countries, and they should be given to buyers at the market. That is my proposal. Thank you. Thank you. Can you imagine energy without consumers? Of course not. Large generation changes. the microgrids change too, and the consumers change. There are various programs where we call consumers clever, smart, and active. I think that consumers are already clever and smart, and you are an active and smart consumer. So how do you see the future from the point of view of consumer? The energy market will change. We will going to have more hydrogen. We will have some changes in the traditional generation. So what do you think about the future of energy market for the next 10 or 15 years? That is a question for the next round table discussion. And as long as I have some time, I can and tell you that we have almost lost heating. The prices, the rates for steam and heat were high. So what was the end of it? The large consumers simply constructed their own heating plants. I see that now the combined power and heating plants started to ask the government to be able to give some heat, but he already lost the market. And if the consumer has already constructed a boiler house, then the investment is made, and you need to make sure that it works and that it pays back. Same happens in energy market. We speak to large consumers and they say, we have calculated, they don't hide the data, that they say in 55 regions of Russia, out of 60 regions members of the unified energy system, it's more profitable to build your own generation. There are no problems with gas. In the past, gas was deficit, but now if you say that you want to buy gas, you will easily find 3 or 4 sellers which have their own gas capacities. So consumers say nowadays, I have made calculations and I can buy it. And you get the same price, and they say that I know that the government will find a way to take money from me, additional money for renewables, for modernization, and people just buy their own generation. We just destroy the energy system which was built before us. The unified energy system exists everywhere, from North Korea to the US. From the economical point of view, it's profitable, but we destroy it. So if you want to know my position of a consumer, I think that generators should come to consumers and say, what do you want? Do you want to have a 15-year contract? Okay, 20-year contract, even better. Sign a contract with us, and we guarantee that it will be more profitable for you to buy energy from this unified system than to construct your own generation. Dear generators, I know that you know the technologies better than me, so you can invent something like gas piston stations. For any large consumers to have your own generation, it's a problem. A lot of investment and a lot of problems. If your business is profitable, you need money for the production of the main goods. And if you give clear arguments, then it's good. Like power delivery contracts, investors, banks, consumers know what it's all about. So to my mind, the future is so that the consumers will say, it doesn't make sense to buy it. I have a guarantee from Interau that in the next 20 years, I will get the profitable and the affordable price of generation. That is the future I believe in. Thank you, Mikhail. It was very interesting. And now I would like to say a few words. During our discussion, we started to talk about non-traditional sources of energy. We cannot speak about the future without touching upon hydrogen. And I invite Dmitry Holkin from EnergyNet. Hydrogen topic was not widely discussed over the last years, but now countries take hydrogen strategies. Japan builds a hydrogen economy, energy, and even hydrogen society. Like hydrogen vehicles, hydrogen cars. People make a stake on hydrogen, but several years ago we couldn't even imagine that hydrogen will be a leading one. We can make forecasts, and in the next 3 years, they believe that the production of hydrogen will increase by 3 times, from 20 to 23. I'm speaking about the whole world. And then the growth will be almost geometric. Electrolyzers will be installed, so in European countries and other countries of the world, the hydrogen is going to be used widely. A lot of investment is attracted to hydrogen and hydrogen energy. Russia doesn't want to lag behind other countries. Various strategies are being developed currently. Russia should, in the future, get at least 20% of the international hydrogen trade market. Various goals can be set in terms of hydrogen production and export. So my question is to you, Dmitry, do you believe in the perspectives of Russian Federation, and what difficulties are we going to face at the international arena? The topic is quite new for our discussions, so I have prepared some slides. When we started to deal with hydrogen energy back in 2016, the topic was not very popular in Russia. Starting with 2018, the boom started. In 2019, Russia started to deal with hydrogen. A lot of things changed. And of course, we talked a lot about hydrogen energy related to the development of renewables as a source of balancing the system. Hydrogen is unique. It is an universal and eco-friendly, clean source of energy, which will help us decarbonize the industry, the economy, the society. So they believe that it's a magic pill against all the problems in the world energy. In many strategic documents, they say it is important to use green hydrogen. In the world, people produce quite a lot of gray and brown hydrogen for industrial purposes, but we understand that the requirements to the clean hydrogen and carbon footprint related requirements will become tougher. As far as the volume of the market is concerned, there are no forecasts about the hydrogen market volume. There are ambitious ideas that by 2050 the volume of hydrogen market will be as big as the today's oil market. But I think that we should use modest forecast. By 2040, this market will account for $70 billion. Now there is no market of traded hydrogen. Russia, for several reasons, is a unique country where you can easily develop hydrogen because there's potential to develop renewable sources, availability of water resources. After 2 days discussion, I can say that in comparison to the renewables program, which causes disputes or opposition or skeptical views in Russia, hydrogen energy is perceived more positively. And it is a good opportunity to increase Russian export. So there are a lot of ambitious goals to export hydrogen. Hydrogen is seen as an instrument to decarbonize Russian industry. Hydrogen is also a good accumulator for a long period of time. So you can create autonomous and eco-friendly systems of energy supply for remote territories. And it's also a good source of energy to develop the Arctics according to the highest world standards of green energy and green technologies. According to our economic assessments related to the consumption of hydrogen domestically, you can use it to replace, for example, coal boilers, because you can make hydrogen or gas and hydrogen boilers. The economic effects will be available. Hydrogen is a new technology, of course. That's why it is expensive. So it's too early to speak about scaling it up in the Russian economy. As far as hydrogen trade at the international market is concerned, in 2020 we have observed that many countries which came out with their programs have demand for hydrogen, like Japan, for example, Germany, South Korea. You can see it on the slide. And that proves that export-oriented vector of development has market potential. The use of existing current potential is important. If you take the current energy of Russia and you add additional capacities, then with the existing capacities we could produce about 3.5 million tons of hydrogen only in Russia. And that is an interesting volume even for Russian energy. That all would be great if there was no requirement that in the European Union from 2035 they require green hydrogen, and Japanese government also requires green hydrogen. In order to develop hydrogen not only for export but also for domestic consumption within the framework of national programs, it's necessary to develop hubs. That is the approach which is widely used in the countries of the world. So it makes sense to create three clusters. Northwest cluster, which is aimed at European markets, so export, as well as domestic consumption. There is an opportunity to use hydrogen in metallurgy, for example, cement industry, for utilities, for example, and so on. Then Eastern Hub or Eastern Cluster, the use of Sakhalin region as a platform to develop the Eastern Cluster or Eastern Vector of hydrogen energy. A lot of projects can be implemented there in the nearest future, like hydrogen rail, for example, trains, hydrogen heating, methane and hydrogen mixtures for cars, vehicles, methane and hydrogen fuel for special vehicles working in the mountains, for example. We have to focus on the production of green hydrogen and green ammonia is demanded by Japan, for example. And the third cluster is the so-called Arctic hydrogen cluster. It will be focused on domestic consumption and provision of energy to remote areas. In the Arctic regions, there are big players like Rosatom and Novatek, which develop their own hydrogen programs there with an idea to develop export, but I would like to draw your attention to an opportunity to develop northern maritime route. It's necessary to develop Arctic stations. And you know how important it is to have as little carbon footprint in the Arctic region as possible. Russia is a chair at the international organization in the Arctic region, and one of the ideas is to decrease the carbon emissions. So thanks to renewables and hydrogen, you can ensure autonomous operation of the station without the necessity to transport fuel, which can work for 1 week without wind. You need hydrogen to be able to operate for 1 week without any need to use additional sources of energy. There are quite a lot of activities related to hydrogen energy last year. For example, the a working group was created. The plan is developed till 2024. The national initiative is developed. There are centers of competition developing analytics and statistics. Meetings of the working groups are organized. The concept of hydrogen energy of Russia till 2035 is almost ready. It's important to emphasize that by 2035, as top priorities, there will be production of low-carbon hydrogen and fossil resources. We also need to focus on the use of renewables. The targets are ambitious. The analytics saw that the market was growing dramatically. That's why by 2035, they believe that it's possible to get from 2 to 7 million tons, which will be exported from Russia to other countries. So we're going to have engineering centers, consortiums, state support, means of public and private partnership, and so on. Now, finalizing my presentation, I can tell you that a new segment of the world market is being developed. Russia reacted fast. We are now acting according to this agenda. Here in Russia, we have opportunities to develop hydrogen industry, hydrogen technologies, hydrogen energy. They can become a significant factor of our economy in terms of export and domestic consumption. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. The topic is truly important, and thank you for raising the idea that Russia has a lot of advantages from the point of view of logistics and resources. We can take an important position as an exporter of hydrogen.
I'd like to connect Mr. Khvalko to our discussion representing Rosenergatom. The entire world looks at the nuclear energy right now. Over the last month, there was one important event. Czech, Slovakia, France, Romania, and Poland presidents asked to include the nuclear energy as a non-carbon energy for the benefits. And China gave a green light to 5 nuclear projects on their territory as the projects respecting Paris Agreement. Our industry has interesting initiatives, including little nuclear power plants. 20% of global market should be conquered by the Russian Federation as far as little nuclear power plants are concerned. We talked about renewables, we talked about hydrogen, and I know that Rosatom has its stand on to all modern topics. You've been working for a long time in the industry. According to you, what are the most prominent development trends for the industry that will shape the industry over the next 10 to 15 years? Good afternoon, colleagues. Glad to see you all and welcome you all this large and important event. Your question, Sasha, requires a lot of answers because a lot of changes are happening right now in our conservative industry. But I would like to highlight digitalization. Under any scenario, digitalization is one of the flagmanship. Our industry is very conservative. Nuclear sector is even more. Our industry is high in competition, but from the beginning of digitalization, it became even more competitive. Because conventional players, I mean generation, grids, networks, resource companies, are substituted by companies that never took part in the industry activities. And by that I mean big IT companies, big companies that don't have energy in their portfolio. And I'm talking about Sberbank, I'm talking about Yandex. And these companies are able to substitute services for the market players. It's not a threat, but it's quite a challenge to the traditional energy. This trend is here to stay. We will compete with these companies, and this is happening not only in Russia, but globally. It's a short answer to your question. This is what makes me nervous a little bit. Talking about nuclear energy as a tool for decarbonization, I'm always glad when I'm talking after Mr. Adronov or when he talks after me, because quite a good synergy is being created. Why I mentioned him, I will be talking not about money in my presentation, but about environment. Why? Because it is important, and it's a point of concern, not only in Russia, but globally. It's one of the topics of our forum. I don't want to be good, either bad, but I will remind a college joke. When Greenpeace man enters a room and sees artificial carpet, he asks the host, do you know how many teddy bears were killed in order for your carpet to be produced? Nuclear energy is an important instrument for decarbonization. It is a part of the global trend. Let's see my first slide. Yes. As I said already, it's a global trend. Nothing new about it. We know it, we understand it, we talk about it. And I try to sum up, if you will, in a way, what is happening right now in terms of air pollution. Figures that are well known by professionals. And I'm not talking about the death toll. I took this figure from the EU documents, from the OECD. This slide clearly indicates that when we're talking about Russia's place in terms of GHG emissions, nuclear power plant is the safest energy source in terms of air pollution and impact on humans' health. Nuclear power plant doesn't generate CO2. We don't burn anything in the reactor, and it's a common knowledge. And when we're neutral, takes uranium kernel. The kernel is divided into the barium and krypton, and 200 megawatts of energy are being released. 1 kilo of uranium equals to the burning of roughly 3 million tons of coal, 50 car carriages. We don't burn any organic matter here. Yes, nuclear energy is the global answer for climate challenges of the 21st century. You know that according to Paris agreements of 2015, Russia engaged to cut its GHG emissions by 2030 for not more than 70% from the 1990 level. Electrical energy accounts for quite a lot of greenhouse gas emissions, 25%. And in Russia, this figure is 35% of all GHG emissions. Talking about CO2 equivalent in terms of emissions calculated for kilowatt hour for the whole life cycle of nuclear power plants, 60 years at 12 grams. And over 60 years, it's a very substantial negative value. And to compare with coal, with gas, you can see the emissions. The nuclear power plant, the CO2, when comparing, is lower as compared with carbon, is 60 times and 40 times less than on gas power plant. Russia economized a lot of CO2 emissions per year, and 4 gigawatts that can replace coal power plants, and I'm talking about nuclear power plants, can save us 10 to 12 million hectares of wood and forests, which is equal to the Greek territory. I can only reiterate that we are convinced that global recognition of nuclear power plants as a low-carbon source of energy will happen in the nearest future. And I'd like to show you several quotes. You can see them on the slides. The world rethinks its attitude towards the nuclear power plant, and the environmental community, scientific and academia understand better and better than nuclear energy is the only quite reliable source of low-carbon energy. And I picked others. A slide from KPMG analysis, 3 risks if nuclear power plants will not be recognized as low-carbon energy sources. First, price increase for electrical energy for the end consumer, the increase of tax burden on Russian exporters while during the introduction of cross-border carbon tax, and Germany that decommissioned all nuclear plants in 2011 has now one of the highest tariffs for energy in Europe. And third risk is will be more expensive to change the system, to modernize the equipment. Europe should spend $500 billion more. The risks are shared by all countries that have nuclear power plants on their territories. issues that prevent the increase of low-carbon generation. There are three, all in all. No universally accessible system of recording and transfer of positive environmental effects created in the sector of renewables and low-carbon energy. Consumers, if when they want, they cannot prove that their energy is green. Second, consumers cannot use environmental effects according to commonly accepted international practice. And third, Russian potential of low-carbon energy is not used completely. And I'm talking about nuclear energy, hydro energy, and renewables. I would like to add that there's another conclusion that is important, once again, that the implementation of the energy provision certificates can solve all three issues, because it will increase the motivation to generate less CO2 intensive energy. Three main dimensions that we highlighted: taxonomy. When we discuss main directions that will be followed by the government in order to assess the green character of a project. And as a consequence, the conditions of funding. We also need to have the national system or certificates in order to record low-carbon sources for electrical energy. Second, active work with other countries. Of course, with the EU, I'm talking about working with expert communities in order to unify the solidity of nuclear energy. And third is the creation of a national stimulation system of sustainable projects. And it's becoming more and more clear that in order to achieve this project, the existing renewables support is not enough. This is what is happening on the market. And now we have two options that are being implemented right now. Fewer demand is satisfied by the existing certificates when we're talking about green character of the energy. And we have the free bilateral agreement as the second mechanism. Free contracts were not created in order to serve for the support of environmental rights, and the use of that can bring the limitation. This is what we have, two mechanisms. And as a company, we are ready now, according to the free contracts, to work, and we work with big consumers with the volumes that we have in our hands. And I'm coming to an end. Next slide, please. Yes. Coming back to the beginning of my presentation, I would like to reiterate that nuclear energy we celebrated 28 years of safe use of nuclear power plants, and we consider that our experience and our technologies are one of the most advanced in the world. It should become one of the most prominent systems in the world, and can be one of the certificates that can be used to certify the green character. As a Russian woman, I would like to wish you all the best, and I wish you to be recognized as the new low carbon source of energy. And with us we have Deputy Minister of Energy of Russia, Mr. Snikas, Pavel. May I bring you on board with our discussion? The regulator position is very important in Russia. We cannot underestimate the position of the Ministry of Energy, and it's important for the development of our industry, and the investments follow the initiatives of the government. When you prioritize developments and it shows that investors follow your signals, it is very important for economic solutions that will be present. Pavel, my question goes to you. What are the main trends that you see? Thank you, Alexandra, for your question. Thank you for providing me with this opportunity to present at this forum. I connected to your discussion quite a while ago. I listened to all the presentations. I know what motivates you. I didn't hear anything new. You have a diversity of positions. They are well argumented. If I may, I would like to start with a little philosophical part. First, the COVID situation showed that the speed of decision-making, the speed of changes is growing rapidly. And I love this example with little boats and big tankers. But now, those will survive, not the big ones, not the small ones, but those that can adapt. And borders between industries become more and more blurred. And we have project activities that when you have specific indicators, when you move to achieve a specific result. And now we see that energy is everywhere in all sectors of economy, and I back the position of the previous panelists, and we're talking about digital transformation and the adherence of other actors, and we have a large base in terms of physical, in terms of people, because electrical energy is everywhere. Next, we understand clearly that energy supports the economy, the current economy. And to my mind, when we modulate the energy, we should base ourselves on the basic principle, and we should start changing from ourselves. Political decisions, economical decisions on the governmental level are based on the specific goals and targets. And Mr. Stolzhenitsyn said that geopolitical decisions are influenced by economic consideration. I agree with that. But we need to pick the basic path to follow. And it's okay dialogue with any regulator, with all the participants from this industry. But what does the consumer require? And I would like to say that out loud. the practice and the large discussion says that first and foremost the well-being of human is a top priority in climate, in environment, becoming more comfortable, the understanding of the internal, the port, buying certificates or some specific electrical energy from a specific generation facility. And we need to ensure that our regulatory system satisfies these requirements. And we need to create the right stimulus. The logic of limitations doesn't work because we have some specific this logic that we can do and others can't should be completely abandoned. Talking about energy on generation level, we need to pay attention at the entire energy life cycle, generation, transfer, and use. And we have regressive transport when the active consumer competes with generation activity. I would like to talk about all cycles of energy generation. First, talking about source of generation, the role of renewables or the highlighting of one type of generation. First, our task as a regulator is to back up the needs of the economy. With the parameters that exist, and I'm talking about both economic and technical parameters, we cannot live without traditional or conventional energy. It will remain the forefront of the sector for 10 to 15 years to come. For sure, gas share will increase. Coal share will decrease. We should be ready for that and give it a good thought. And maybe to make coal-generated energy clear. Taxonomy brings us to that. And we know that technologies are developing rapidly. And for the next 2 years, maybe we'll see some important technological breakthroughs. In coal generation, we see that we will be able to dramatically decrease emissions from the direct coal burning. Talking about our partners, our colleagues, we have some limitations. In terms of land plots, for instance, to implant facilities. And the competitive advantages will be a compact character. The regulatory scale and the time of construction. These are two main competitive advantages. Should be smaller, and leaders are here. Nuclear energy, for instance. And I am sure that the future of Russian energy cannot be seen without nuclear energy. And by 230, 240, nuclear generation will be growing, and we are waiting small nuclear generators that will allow us to shape in a different manner the development of several regions, including remote ones. Hydrogen takes the lead, and if now, technically, we will be able to make a difference
Международных возможностей экспорта и внутренних возможностей части водорода мы тоже можем продвинуть. Второе, мне кажется, водород.
Second, hydrogen. Yeah. Third, gas, of course, without any doubt. And gas generation is here to stay, and we cannot live without it. And as well, energy generated by hydroelectric power stations. And I hope that new HPPs will appear. There are some limitations in terms of flooding, but from the regulatory standpoint, both in Russia and abroad, are not really severe. We should not forget about hydroelectric potential. And the price-quality ratio, as well as construction time, are two main criteria. Renewables, solar and wind, should be the priorities. Colleagues, you have this competitive advantage, and I hope with the development of industrial storage, you should be able to compete globally, and I hope that you will be able to cut costs quickly and arrive to price parity. This is what I wanted to say on generation. And I heard that we have quite a pure, clean balance and carbon neutral. And we know that green is a buzzword, but when we talk about green, I think about moss or something old. It's only my perception. I prefer clean over green energy. And from the green energy standpoint and clean balance as a regulator, we need to trigger the increase of it. And I hope that measures that are being implemented within the frontal strategy will allow us to maintain this competitive advantage and make it even bigger and larger. Talking about energy transfer, technologies are changing as well, and I believe in unified energy system, and Mikhail Andronov is right. This scalability should be maintained by connecting energy grids. This system is more solid. The reliability issue will become the top priority. And the quality assessment of energy provided will become more and more important from the regulatory standpoint, but also from the consumer standpoint. And this analogy with the heat market, when consumers voted with their money and when they constructed their own sources of heating, the same can occur in energy generation market. If quality of energy will not be high enough, consumers may take a stake and create their own energy generating facilities. This trend is global, and we will try to become as ready as possible on that. The decree that has been adopted recently, and I'm talking about a micro-generation dossier, will show whether it will be in high demand in Russia. Now, about the market and the consumer market, we have the technologies, we have guaranteeing suppliers, and I echo the previous speaker. The question of digital transformation, the speed of change, speed of picking the right supplier will become even higher. In absence of change, they will not be able to maintain the market, and Nokia example speaks for itself. We we will be forced to change.
Поэтому электроэнергетика Российской Федерации работает на сегодняшний момент.
Energy sector of Russia works in a quite stable manner.
Доля, там, возможно,
The share of the increase
мне кажется, у него есть все
of renewables, the increase of share of renewables will maintain its pace and will decrease as well the costs. And Mr. Zhukharев mentioned questions. What should be first? Give us great volumes and we will be able to give you low price. Or you give us a low price, we will take a big volume. Someone has to make a decision for itself. Market trend says that if you don't give goods in case of the presence of demand, someone else will phase you out from the market. Investors' position should change. Maybe the payback period will not become 5 to 7 years, but should be longer probably. And this question can be solved differently. I hope that I answered your questions. I tried to discuss all facets of energy sector. You took a bit different approach to many questions, was even interesting for me. And we have two representatives of heat generation, and we will connect them. Thank you, Pavel, for attracting our attention that traditional generation has in short term no substitution. I would like to talk about two generations. First, TPP, and I would like to address this to the Quadros CEO. We are the largest country with centralized heating system, and we used to say that it's our competitive advantage because the combined cycle energy generation is very efficient. We have 100 million people connected to the central heating system. So my question goes to you: in order to investors to be interested in TPP, invest trillions of rubles in TPPs as they do now in hydro and in renewables, what prevents them from doing that? Because it's an efficient production method. What impediments do we face in order to make the segment more investment attractive? I was envy when I was asking the question about trillions of rubles invested in renewables, because I asked myself what shall be done in order to bring the same money to the thermal energy. I will not be talking about problems. I would base my presentation on Michael's presentation, because he gave a good example about the rights of consumers. It was the basis of the long-term sustainable development of the USSR era, because they had a good balance between steam, electric, and gas consumers. Unfortunately, this balance has been destroyed, and the regulation has been cancelled right after the destruction of this balance. Now you can pass your own contracts. This is what I wanted to say about the system that has been created in the USSR that formed the basis of the reliability of steam generation. 80% of population uses central heating, and very briefly, this is a new situation. We still have an opportunity to modernize plants. We have 300 heating plants and 20 electrical plants, and we are going towards each other. Uniting several things, we will be able to achieve good results. And we did it in several regions, and we see the results already. First, unfortunately, the sanctions, and I'm talking about commode, the results are achieved on the government level. We cannot compete with large condensed plants. Now, we can make a change in this. Second opportunity is unique opportunity to change the mindset of Russian entities and municipalities in terms of concessional agreements approach. Now we see that the amount of concessional agreements is growing. We see how it works. It works fine. We have some tangible results. Can be seen. We can compare past versus present already, and how the efficiency is achieved. When money for infrastructure is concerned, if all the processes will be brought together, we will be able to quickly and reasonably modify the energy generation system. So from the source to the consumer, there is a possibility to quickly do a modernization. It's not a simple declaration. It is important to synchronize these processes, and they should be practically oriented. And now if we can have greater attention from the government, and that the money, if the money is given to the right purposes, we will be able to make a change and quickly modernize the entire system from the source to the consumer. In terms of environmental agenda, we did an environmental year last year. Now we have an environmental screen which we use in order to filter all the projects. And heat generation will be covered by these principles in a couple of years. We will pay great attention to that, and I think we will be in time. Thank you. I wish you all the best, and I wish the investors pay great attention to steam generation. Investors, they want to have their investments back. This is why you need to provide long-term regulations and guarantee of return. This is what we lacked in order for quadra companies, such as quadra companies and TPPs are becoming rapidly. But there's a traditional heating business. Gas turbines competition. I invite you, and soon we will have pick this traditional modernization of contracts by 2027, and in parallel you will pick for the 3-year perspective and innovative gas machines. We postponed it a couple of times. Everyone is ready, and the first competition is open. We receive applications until May 1st. Technical requests are here. Financial applications will be presented soon, and we have 7.5 times more applications if we compare it with the required volume. The competition is so high, it means that investors believe in it. And I know that you personally and the company was always still is in favor of steam gas technologies. What is your explanation of this fuzz from investors? Why they do believe in gas turbines? And the second question is maybe a bit more complicated. Taking into account today's discussion, by 2030 we will implement gas turbines with 1.5 gigawatts, for instance. But in 2035, maybe we will have to switch to other technologies. I don't know, hydrogen turbines, for instance. Are we in time? And the last question, it's a traditional one, localization. We have quite a high requirements in terms of localization, and they have an impact on the price of Russian gas turbine. Do you agree that the current requirements in terms of localization are reasonable? Good afternoon, esteemed colleagues. Alexandra, thank you for your questions. Yes, indeed. We see that some applications are just a phenomenon. 12 gigawatts, 7.5 times more that we require. But it shows us that there is a demand in the industry on this technology. But when we talk about the future, undoubtedly, it lays into two dimensions: efficiency and environmental friendliness. No one will argue about it. Talking about that Energa, initially we aimed at efficiency. And environmental issues were not high on the agenda back then. But efficiency-wise, our task to become leaders by 2025 in terms of both environmental friendliness and efficiency, in terms of in the field of the heat generation. We did a good job. We realized 2 projects. Why we did that? Because we understood the importance of that, and we convinced consumers and the government that we have to move capacity supply agreements, CDAs, in the regions that more needed that. And another project that you've mentioned already, 65% of efficiency, our hydropower plant, is a fantastic contribution to both efficiency and environmental friendliness. What was going on, what is still going on in terms of heat generation over the last year, over the last couple of years, a larger program of CDAs. The first program has been implemented 10 years ago, if I'm wrong, and it was aimed at efficiency and environmental friendliness. Downsides, yes, this program was not implemented, taking into account competition. And second, this problem, gas machines were all foreign-made. What about co-mode program? The scale of it is as big as the previous one. And what's an upside? Upside is a tough competition, and we see it over many years. We see that the competition is very tough, but only during competition in order to become victorious. So it's very difficult to become a part of the program, but it's not difficult to implement the program itself, and it's an important nuance. Downsides we do have, we don't talk anything about efficiency. two projects from 101 projects were only picked. Come on, there's no efficiency there. Second downside, there's a higher demand in efficiency and environmental friendliness, but we took several steps back. The 6th year of applications will be the same in terms of efficiency because we didn't change any rules. But 1.6 gigawatts of innovative turbines can rectify a little bit the situation. But this is not the volume that the market needs today. The figures are completely different, but there's a big advantage here. We are focused on Russian manufacturers, and I'm absolutely convinced that the program will be implemented with great success. Why? Because the pick will be done for 2027, 2029, plus we have the grace period. And let me reformulate that. We have more than enough time in order to come up with the gas turbines with the right quality. But as within any discussion, it is very important to say that market volume and market are important factors. If we talk about 1.7 gigawatts, it is not very motivating for greenfield projects. But the market demand is just colossal. We have a lot of cold territory in Russia, and we need to generate not only electricity but also heat. Over the next decade, we don't see any possibility to radically increase efficiency, taking into account the decrease in heat consumption on summer, for instance. This is why steam gas turbine can show all its potential. In terms of criteria under the Accumulators program, I really liked the idea expressed by Stepan Solzhenitsyn, and I agree with him. When we take a decision, it should be taken based on rentability, not only based on environmental friendliness, but should be a comprehensive decision. But how do we measure it? If we try to measure length using weights, that's a very complicated task. Come on. Second, we need to adhere to the principle, and Pavel Snickers said that. We need to look over the entire life cycle, the entire period of project implementation. And there's an important thing about measuring the efficiency of co-mode applications. We take into account the historical load factor, but when we pick projects for 2027, it's absolutely clear that for 2027, and these objects should be used during 25 years, we plan on the horizon of 2050. Do you think that while picking projects, the managerial decision should be made, taking into account load factors of 2 previous years? It doesn't reflect the reality at all. And for the next 30 years, and even within the next 5 to 10 years, taking into account the environmental agenda. Why? Because the plant is charged now, loaded now, not because they are over-efficient, most of them, but because the fuel is cheap. Come on, fuel there is cheap. But when we talk about the fact that for the efficiency and for the emissions, we will have to pay, the generation structure and the load can dramatically change. And I'm not talking about any other factors. So the decision made on historical data is a wrong one. What's the issue? What's the issue? The payment should be done according to your work that has been performed already. It's your choice. You need to establish your own threshold, but you will be paid only for the generation that you guaranteed. This is one part of the answer. Second part of the answer, that is even more important, if I may, is related to the fact that the competition should be neutral and all effects shall be taken into account. What am I talking about? The straight line average price is 2.5 rubles. Coal, 1.5 rubles. And when we, oh, by the way, can you change the slide, please?
The selection of modernization projects over the 5-year period was 1.7. The maximum price of selection was 2.2. Speaking about the regional power station, it was 2.1. When the selection was made, it was not taken into account that high efficient projects are not only about paying for capacities and electric power. From each project, you have effect by decreasing or not decreasing the price. Based on the principles which are used on the market of energy, you take into account only commission, and when you commit high capacities, it leads to the decrease of price for all consumers. Not all of them, not only those who take the energy from this power station. This effect is really significant. I took some cases as far as Zayanska regional power station is concerned. The annual effect is more than 8 billion rubles. If you commission only one block, then the single rate changes. That means that if you take all the costs and effects for consumers, the project is better than the minimum price we had selected over the period of 5 years. And one more project with calculations, their effects are even higher. So if the price is 3.5 rubles and you decrease the price for electric power, then the price is just 40 kopecks. In program of modernization, there is a huge effect embedded to modernize electric market without problems for the consumers and with better advantages for them. This is exactly what should happen if you have a fully fledged modernization. Consumers put money, pay for modernization, and get effect. They know why the technological improvement is needed. This is the picture to demonstrate the potential of the modernization. Now, another thing which we should not do, which we should correct and avoid. There is a huge demand from the side of generators, but 12 is not an indicator. The quote is limited not only by gigawatts, but also by turbines, and we as companies should not declare more than 2 machines, and if you have the third machine, it will compete with them inside of one company. I believe the potential is is much bigger in this regard. So all the companies were guided by this principle. They didn't want to create any competition inside of the company. What is needed to make sure that it takes place? Of course, 1.6 as a selective price is a well-awaited and significant event. Alexander said it, but as a matter of fact, it's just a small step on the long path we should go. Let's go back to the thesis. If it's possible to do localization here, I believe yes. I have no doubts that localization with regard to the potential of our mechanic engineers, power machines, we checked what these companies have, and we don't have doubts that they can implement it by 2027 or 2030. There are no doubts at all, but there is a question about volumes. And in order to have volumes, you need to correct the program for the rest 4 years. As far as the first zone is concerned, only 13 gigawatts are left. The potential, the demand for 12 gigawatts is there, but the quotes are only for 13 gigawatts. Unfortunately, the bigger part of the program did not use the potential. How does this decision look in long-term perspective from the point of view of the development of new technologies? Of course, we believe in technological advance, and we know that something can be made better. People will come up with better technologies in the nearest 10 years. But when we speak about combined circle gas turbine units, you have to choose either between modernization or recovery of older turbines and steam plants, and it's evident that based on the figures, we need to move on. Will it be subject to influence of solar, wind, and other renewable sources? Yes, of course. The applications are made to the competition, then generators have to comply with the requirements. Competition should be at the level of obligation fulfillment. My colleagues told me that we have 37 gigawatts of traditional generation, but the accum is less than that of renewables. So the program should foresee responsibilities and liabilities of the generating companies. In this case, we will be able to give the best, the most correct, and eco-friendly solutions to the market. Is that important? It is. And I'm sorry if I repeat myself, but I know that we have already spoke about it. Mikhail Andronov spoke about it. But I would like to emphasize once again, the question is not only about environment and perspectives of climate. The problems will become more and more relevant. But the question is also about efficiency. If we as generators do not satisfy the needs of our consumers and we are not efficient, then they will create their own generation. 15 generating capacities work outside of the wholesale market. In the nearest 10 years, from 7 to 10 gigawatts will account for self-generation by consumers, and altogether it will account for 25 gigawatts. That will destroy a unified energy system. That will lead to the decrease of the energy system. Consumers will be hit for sure, and the energy industry and the generators will suffer as well. Thank you. I hope that I could answer your question. Thank you very much. Now we're about to finish our plenary session, and I would like to make an announcement of the next event. There is an organization called the International Energy Council. It's a large international organization, and next year, here in St. Petersburg, a large event will be organized under the aegis of the International Energy Council. They organize events once in 4 years. The next event will take place in St. Petersburg. I have the statistics and the forecast of this company for the development of various segments of generation till 2050. What can I say? I can tell you that despite the fact that the share of segments change and the Energy Council, which is a big international platform, foresees that by 2050 generation will be different. There will be traditional sources of energy, renewable sources of energy, traditional energy will decrease, but according to the forecast it will be more than 40%. There will be coal, there will be hydrogen, there will be nuclear, there will be renewable sources. All the segments will be demanded even in 2050. So thank you very much, dear participants of our event, those who joined us online. Thank you for those who came to visit us personally. Thank you, dear audience. You have been with us for about 3 hours and you listened to our position regarding the destiny of the energy industry. I would like to wish all of us that the energy system of Russia in 21st century is so good that our descendants will be proud of the system we built in the 21st century. Thank you.